From WBRN Radio in Boston and on the Boston Red Network. The title of our episode is Katrina, 2017, Puerto Rico. One of the titles we were working on, and perhaps it could be Puerto Rico, the new Katrina. And nonetheless, we'll figure this out when we finally get it edited. Nonetheless, on the 28th of September 2017, incidentally, in the sports world, the Twins in the American League clinched a wild card berth, and they will play on, I believe, Tuesday, the Yankees in New York. The Angels were eliminated from the contest. The Cubs also clinched the Western Division tonight in the National League, or on Wednesday night. Two that did clinch. The title of this episode is inspired by none other than Marco Vegas Rubio, the senator from the state of Florida. The Katrina-style disaster in Puerto Rico is what he informed the White House on the 26th, 2 days ago, saying that he needed to raise the alarm about Puerto Rico's dire strait. He told the White House on that would be Tuesday that the federal government needs to take over recovery efforts on the island quickly to prevent Hurricane Katrina-style disaster in the U.S. territory. Now, this has been a sound footing. There's standard disaster type protocols taken in a disaster relief on an international basis. Now, in the islands, Cuba is one of the leading authorities on it, and the Trump administration should have called in the Cuban government to assist. Cuba has well on the way of taking care of problems that had arisen from the recent hurricane there in Cuba and the rest of the islands. But they have not done this. In fact, efforts are hampered by the Jones Act. For those that have not heard of the Jones Act, I had not heard of it. In 1920, it was enacted in a totally different atmosphere that says that between U.S. ports, and of course San Juan being a U.S. port in the territory, that U.S. Cargo ship, the U.S. Merchant Marine Fleet, can only be used. Well, that is good, but at the same time, it can be waived. It was waived during Katrina and waived during various other national disasters. And in this case, foreign flag ships could get some of the supplies in. And supplies are arriving there in San Juan and the ports there around Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is an island. It has to be remembered, as DJ Trump got that part of it correct. But the rest of his stratagem is very deficient as usual. And it has a bad flavor of Brownie, if you remember Brownie. Old Brownie was the director of FEMA under G.W. Bush. And G.W. said Brownie was doing a good job. Brownie was not doing the job. Brownie was finally relieved of his quote-unquote command and disgraced and turned into not only a national disgrace, but an international disgrace was old Brownie, as he was called, Mr. Brown. But in this particular instance, the administration evidently had to be prodded, and as Professor Reed of Oakland said, it boils down basically to the color of the people. No doubt about that. This America First administration and its propaganda, and it's still there. Old Miller is still there, the white supremacist that has been lurking around there. And at the same time, DJ Trump called Nazis, neo-Nazis, other gangsters, good people. Whereas he claimed the resistance to the fascists were bad people in effect. Well, the situation is very, very tenuous. The Army Corps of Engineers has a lot of experience in this, and they should be on the ground there, and also the U.S. military. Because what needs to be done there, and the naval CBs know how to do this, they have to build not only landing fields in many remote parts, but also roads. And communication towers need to be set up. The military knows how to do that. They did that in Afghanistan. They can set those towers up virtually overnight once they get the equipment in, and it can be flown in. They have large cargo planes, and they can set up runways that will accommodate those large cargo planes. Within a day or so, and those planes will start coming in, bringing the towers, generators, those kinds of things in that are needed. A veteran of hurricanes as in South Florida, the senator needlessly sounded shocked by what he saw and heard during a trip to San Juan. This is from Politico. He said that he was even more worried about what he didn't see on the island. 3.4 million people live there. Isolated survivors who lack phone and power in rural areas that are in danger of running out of drinkable water, fuel, medical supplies, you name it. He said the U.S. Defense Department, already involved with recovery efforts in Puerto Rico, will likely have to take on an expanded, and not likely they will, an expanded role. He said the Army Corps of Engineers might need to come in. They should have already been there and assess transportation corridors, build temporary bridges. And this is the same thing Senator Schumer, the Democratic leader of the Senate, said. Roads are in a shambles by Maria. We're going to have to open up more airfields, no doubt about that. We're going to have to figure out ways to move more rapid delivery of goods. We're going to have to figure out how to surge up and house restoration crews. We're going to have to add a federal presence beyond simply assisting the Puerto Rican government. There's no doubt about that. Puerto Rico will need a lot of assistance, billions of dollars. Thus, old man McConnell, the leader of the Senate, and little Paulie Ryan in the House need to write a bill very, very quickly to add a few $1 billion more to this recovery. And DJ Trump can just simply put his little initial on there. He likes to sign his name anyway to things. Maybe he can even put a picture postcard there. And it'll be in every house in Puerto Rico. Nonetheless, back to the Jones Act to allow foreign flag vessels to stop over in Puerto Rico to deliver supplies. He cautioned the problem on the land are more complex than usual because of transportation communication systems. Well, one of the things in a military operation, this should be a military operation. Forget about the civilian part of it right now. Is you establish your communications lines first, and then you establish the airstrips simultaneously, actually. But you get communications up, then you get up your accesses to various places, your airfields, start putting in main artery roads, and then you have to figure out how you're going to get these supplies to remote areas. Normally using those big lift-type helicopters. They can lift thousands of pounds, tons. So in other words, you can deliver to remote areas, and you can also get the personnel there, teams of people. They've done that before. They've done that in Sudan. There were places dropping water supplies literally in the middle of the desert. This can all be put together by the military within hours, and not actually in less than days, not weeks. It can be done. And as far as getting up cell towers, they can put up some temporary cell towers. That way you get communications going. And then at the same time, the electrical grid. That's another issue right there. The taxpayers of the U.S. are going to have to buy a new electrical grid for Puerto Rico. That is how it is going to happen. And they should call in the Cuban government because they know what they're doing and have the experience to do it. And there are other governments also in that area that have the experience they don't here. For those, but Miami is 5 days away. Jacksonville is 7 days. Need new power poles and big trucks to help the crew erect them. And this is how many in Jacksonville is 7 days away. And the need, though unclear, has been thoroughly qualified. Nearby capacity to help and provide resources for severe constraint. This is Irma. which caused renation from the Keys to Jacksonville. Even if power crews showed up, they could encounter dangerous conditions that they haven't faced on the mainland. No doubt about this. And this is the reason we're getting the Cubans in there, people that understand what to do. And it is a different situation out. There's no doubt about that. This is a big problem, but it can be solved. They understand how to do this in war zones. He toured the Coast Guard facility and saw that the disaster response consisted of a paper map, it's just BS, on the wall with sticky notes and 4 landlines that were hoping people out in the field would be able to call in with SAC phones or satellite phones, report back simultaneously what they had. The 4 landlines hoping that anyway. The wall and not a 21st century respond. And that is true. This is not a slight on the Coast Guard. What happened when no internet, no phone connectivity, no radio to radio capacity? Well, they can get radio to radio capacity there. They can actually even deploy a satellite for that alone. You just get the space on the satellite and you're in business. They don't have anything going down there, it appears from what he said. Now, the paper map on the wall is just bull. They should have computers there and run by generators. Now, those sticky notes, 3M notes, or whatever you want to call them, just will not cut it. In other words, what's happened here, the station had never been modernized, period. And what happens in a disaster, disasters like what's going on here, when things have been lacking for a very long time? Cut to the chase, Puerto Rico is seen in the U.S. as a people of color colony, basically speaking. Such the same thing happened to African Americans in New Orleans. And thus the high priority is not there as you would have in Key West and in Jacksonville, that area there. They had to get that back on line willy-nilly. They got the people in there. They even had people bunked in temporary, these were the power workers, in temporary facilities. They could drive the equipment there. But the military can airlift the equipment there. They can build runways where they can move Abrams tanks, which normally come in on ship, but they have large enough ships where they can bring in several hundred of these trucks if they wish. And they could at least have in about 50 of those big trucks. Poles can come by ship. They should have had those. In other words, because of the lead time by the hurricane storm warning system, they should have had these supplies on the ready. They usually do. But they should have had these poles on ships, lights on ships, mobile towers on ships, and on their way towards Puerto Rico as soon as they could get it in there. And it doesn't take that long to sail to Puerto Rico, and by plane. He goes on here. President Trump briefly touched on the issue, but he was too busy noting that much of the island was destroyed with billions of dollars. But he's talking about Wall Street banks. To hell with Wall Street banks. With a sign of the signature, he can just guarantee those loans and forget it. And old man McConnell and company can get to work. Florida was missed, of course, by Maria. They did miss Florida. As many as 1,000 families were moving weekly to Orlando. Now, this is another issue here. A lot of Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, and they can easily move back to the mainland, and they are. A lot of Puerto Ricans are in the Orlando area in Florida. In fact, now there are as many Puerto Ricans in Florida as in New York. Now, I lived in New York. Of course, it was more like a shuttle from Puerto Rico to the U.S. They come, and now better climates, and instead of moving, say, to New York, they can move to Florida and still basically be on an island. As far as tourism, you can forget that right now. They have to get the island livable before that can happen. All these people are calling our office trying to get stuff in. $500,000 in medical supplies, and a barge, out of Tampa is ready to go with a bunch of stuff. AT&T wants to fly in equipment to continue to restore communications, Rubio said, and all of these being told you've got to wait 6 days, 5 days. There are 100 planes in front of you. It's a challenge. Well, no doubt about that, but the military can supply these planes. That's sort of like what happened when Walmart had semis with bottled water and were turned away in the Katrina situation. This is just bad planning here, and DJ Trump's not going to be allowed here to pull a brownie type operation because people don't believe it. This is one of the problems, and has been the problem with fake news or so-called inaccurate news or PR. When people don't believe it, it doesn't work. The same thing happened down in Alabama on Tuesday. The powers to be there, old man McConnell, Karl Rove, and their ilk, put over $10 million into ads attacking Judge Moore. But the problem was Judge Moore had already written his narrative with the people of Alabama. So no amount of money could sway the election. Almost 10 points there, which that meant if it was effective, and this is one of the things we've been studying, how many points were they able to keep off of Judge Moore? Well, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 points. They were able to hit him there, but it got to the point when DJ Trump arrived there for Big Luther, it was too late. Even Trump had to admit that Big Luther, as LBJ would say, was a goner. And that was the end of Big Luther right there. Big Luther will not be heard from. He'll just stay in Washington until the new person arrives, and he'll go back to whatever lobbying firm he used to be with, and they'll award him for loyal service to the cause. But it doesn't help DJ Trump at all. So now he's got Puerto Rico. He's come out with a new tax bill for the rich. I guess we'll move on to that. Professor Reich, out of Berkeley, was debating some clown on CNN. And the problem here is, and has always been, on the recovery situation, that people just don't have a discretionary income to boost the sales. In other words, you have a demand situation going. People can only buy so many 60 or 70 or whatever they are televisions, so many smartphones. Even Bill Gates has given up the ghost, and he's on Android these days. He can afford anything he wants. But the whole point is this, that when you have the type of system we have now, the trickle-down theory, back when Reagan was in office, that was 30 years ago, more than 30 years, at least 30 years ago. When he was leaving was 30 years ago, 87, 88. Anyway, nonetheless, much smaller economy, was not internationalized. It was George H.W. Bush that came with the New World Order, which basically said we were moving to a global economy, and that's what we have now. So these old schemes don't work. And when you start offering $1 trillion tax cuts, how do you pay for it? Well, there's no scheme to pay for it. They just figure, well, we'll cut some discretionary programs. But the problem there is you can only cut, it's a small amount of the budget. You can only cut it so much, and you got to move on to the big pies like Medicare and those kinds of things. Well, that piece is not there. And then you have the military pie there. That is a part of the pie that is virtually 50% or more useless, literally. It doesn't add up, as they say. Kind of jump off the subject here, not trying to get a stream of consciousness going here. But again, Professor Reed was talking about Ken Burns' Vietnam. And effectively, I've not seen it. According to the professor and some other people, Burns was basically saying, well, the media and protests did the war end. Well, the problem with the war was this. It was not the media, because the media for very long, Dan Rabbitt could comment on this, much more eloquent than I, that the media for very long supported the war. And President Johnson was trapped in the war. And a lot of people like to knock President Johnson, but he was tapped in there by the Wilsonian foreign policy that he inherited, which is a racist foreign policy. He was trying to figure out how to get out of the war, in other words, out of Vietnam. So that was a whole another bag of worms there that went on. Yes, the protests, I recall those were very small. Then they got to be larger. But even in that, some of the people were very critical of Burns on the African Americans that participated. They had a little clip from Kwame Ture, known at the time as Mr. Carmichael. But that was not the essence of the war. The essence of the war is when followers of O.J. Simpson came out there, and O.J. was in business in 1968, came out there in great numbers, because prior to that you had the peace movement, which was a very small movement. Dr. King tried to tap into the people there, but when it got to be not only the peace movement, but students there, and finally on to the middle and working classes. That's demonstrations here, but also the brave soldiers from the Democratic Republic of Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh, and the rest of the socialist countries, the Chinese, the USSR, supplied weaponry to them and training to them. The Koreans from the Democratic Republic flew missions there. And all of these things put together, the U.S. found themselves in a situation where the Vietnamese people themselves had turned on them. Even the people in Saigon, they were all working on, as they say, a double deal there for the most part. They were working in favor of their country. That is what did Vietnam in. And that is the end of that. Let me just finish this up here. Medical supplies, diabetics are not getting their insulin. They can't refrigerate anyway. Senior citizens are being challenged. And these are the reasons why you need the military to increase, because they need to get supplies there. They can do that. They do have mobile operations. That way the military budget can be used properly. As far as this FEMA is good, but basically for the mainland U.S., they really don't have a lot of experience in islands. And let me add to this, the Virgin Islands also, African Americans there, they have been devastated. And their source of economic power is like Puerto Rico, tourism. So that's the situation you have there. And a lot of the this is from the San Juan Daily Star. We need to get to this. Multinational in Puerto Rico respond to hurricane effort. And the Walmart people, we don't have a timetable yet on being fully operational, but we're working very hard to recover their operations on the island. As of this morning, hundreds of loads of water, emergency supplies, and other resources like generators have been delivered to the island, are on their way. That's from Walmart. The Sprint organization, due to severe damage caused by Hurricane Maria, the impact on Sprint's network, technical staff have mobilized to review the state of our sites in Puerto Rico. Reconstruction process to reestablish communication as quickly as possible and safely as possible for all of our customers. Our first shipment arrived in Puerto Rico with generators, parts required for restoring, and crews of engineers and technicians from the U.S. have joined on a local team from AT&T. We are closely monitoring our network in Puerto Rico and working to address the full effects of Hurricane Maria. Storm damage is significant across the region, and commercial power is unavailable, both which can affect our ability to provide a service. Johnson & Johnson. Our primary assessment here is that our fiscal facility, a lot of drug companies, incidentally, in Big Pharma, as they're now called, in Puerto Rico. Now let me go on here. Bristol Myers Squibb, Puerto Rico sustained significant damage. Our primary concern is with our workers, their families, and the citizens of Puerto Rico. We have some damage to one of our 3 facilities. However, we are executing contingency plans that we believe will negate product supply risks as we assess the situation on the island. So that is from them. And also the Myers Squibb Foundation is responding with a $250,000 cash donation to supply emergency relief. Honeywell International, a spokesman said the company focuses on making sure that its workers are safe, and they are working on it. Our folk on the ground are making sure everyone is accounted for. So that is what they have to say. It's kind of interesting. This daily here has a PDF. This was on Wednesday the 27th, the San Juan Daily Star. We like to get as much local information as possible. Let me look on our time here because we have to go do the sports. Incidentally, Hugh Hefner died, the founder of Playboy. We'll have a special program on his life. Died in Los Angeles. He was 91 years old. He no doubt evolutionized, and what some would say revolutionized, the moral compass of the U.S. in particular, as sexuality is there, and to do a fair assessment to him. Hefner, who built, this is from the New York Times, the Playboy empire and embodied it, dead at 91. Hugh Hefner may rest in peace, as they say. He created the Playboy magazine. He was headquartered in Chicago. In fact, I remember working for a nonprofit where we got a small grant from, of all things, the Playboy Foundation. Now let's make sure we didn't miss anything here. Rick Patillo, as we start our sports segment, is out. He is suspended indefinitely from the basketball program at the University of Louisville. Now, the University of Louisville. Now, this is part of a wider investigation involving Adidas. Adidas, the largest maker of sports shoes, manufacturer, I guess we should say, in the U.S. That particular situation is developing, we'll say. Let's do the sport now. Go to ESPN and get the sport done here. And for many, clinching, as we said earlier, the Cubs have clinched their position in the National League Central. They won that. And also at the same time, the Twins have got a wild card berth. They will go to New York. So at ESPN, they talk about written off at the deadline. Twins make history by clinching their little wild card. They got one. Patino, well, he's doomed. And there's a story here, the inside story of how the FBI rocked college basketball. We'll look at it, and we'll get to Major League Baseball scores here also. As we're in the final week of Major League Baseball, we're going to crisis mode here, kind of like President Obama when he delivered his daughter to college. Step by process of how the word corruption and fraud it came to college.
Let me ask you, how much do the shoe companies have?
We won't get that, but announced that 10 people, including 4 college football assistant coaches, were arrested as part of a 3-year investigation to bribing corruption in the sport. Assistant coaches from Arizona, Auburn, Louisville, we just talked about that one, University of Miami, and Oklahoma State and USC were implicated in the investigation on Wednesday. Louisville announced that its athletic director, Jerish, and longtime coach, had been placed on administrative leave. That's Rick Pitino. Mr. Kim, he's the acting U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. So these people have been, as they say, called out here. Marty A Pittsburgh-based financial advisor was charged by the Securities and Exchange Commission with wire fraud, accused of siphoning $2.35 million from the accounts of several professional athletes in order to invest in a movie project. Oh boy! He made Ponzi-like payments. I'm not sure how he got in that. That was last year. Securities and Exchange Commission alleged that Blazer, who founded Blazer Capital Management, targeting pro athletes and other high worth individuals. Not sure how this got in here, but oh wait a minute, just a second here. Okay, first the advisors, then the coaches. We got time to cover this story. They got him first. He was also involved, incidentally, with pro football. They allege that Blazer had personal financial interest in the development of Mafia the movie. Blazer took $500,000 from clients' accounts away and invested in the movie. That seems like a worthless movie from the thing. Anyway, on August 4th this year, the Securities and Exchange Commission ordered Blazer to make restitution of $1.8 million and to pay civil penalties of $150,000. It wasn't the first time he was under investigation. From the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, some football player filed a complaint against old Blazer. Anyway, as we move on here, this past summer, a former LSU tailback, Leon Fontenette, and a former Clemson quarterback, Deshaun Watson, among the players who wore Mitchell's suits on the first night of the NFL draft. Now, this also goes. His clients include NFL players. Oh, this is sometime during the fall. Blazer to Rashawn Mitchell, a former NBA and Southern California Conference referee, after leaving his referee role in 2001. Rashawn opened Thomas anyway. Oh, it's a clothing store. Anyways, clients included Terry Brinkwater, Sammy Hopkins, and Michael Evans. Anyway, Michael, 43, attended Talladega College, historically African-American school, and worked as a referee. There's a bunch of these characters in here. Had been in the spotlight before. In 2011, he was confronted by former NBA star Dominique Wilkins while Wilkins was wrapping up his broadcasting duties with the Hawks. A video anyway. Mitchell told the Atlanta police that Wilkins owed him $12,000 from customary. Oh, anyway, not so much of this. This is going on and on. I think we finally get to Pearson here. Very long story. Okay. Pearson, who was in Auburn, leading a score during the interview. Wait a minute here. So when you get into a very long, I guess this is the Auburn connection here. According to the phone conversation was intercepted by the FBI. That was in December. Pearson told an unidentified player's mother that her son was going to be good enough to go in the first round. Pearson told her that he had a financial advisor he wanted to work with. That was Blazer. So this is how I guess he gets into it. Former Auburn star Charles Barkley's advisor, neither which were true. Oh boy. So this is where the scheme evidently started. Blazer indicated he'd pay the players' parents a few $1,000s a month for the next 4 months and give them $1,000 during the initial meeting. He wired the $10,000 to Pearson's bank on the 27th of December. and 11,000 more in January this year. Blazer and Pearson said he was giving Mitchell a portion of the bribe. In other words, this thing goes on and on. Mitchell met with Blazer at a restaurant in Atlanta and discussed a proposal which would pay Mitchell a monthly basis to connect Blazer with other coaches. So this is evidently how the plot started and thickened. The Auburn president told CNN he received a call Monday night and was advised that an FBI agent wanted to meet with Leafen the next morning. Now, I guess this Leafen character must be part of the Auburn coaching staff. University did get some reassuring news late from the U.S. Attorney's offices in the Southern District of New York, but the university itself was not a target of the investigation. Said the coaches had identified two student athletes in the investigation. This sort of the sneaker company here. I mean, this thing goes on and on and on. Announced that it would suspend. This is Rick Pitino here. This is in Louisville. Pitino and one of the sport's most successful coaches are failing to just monitor things. He didn't take any money, evidently. So Adidas is thrown in here. Adidas employee and former Clemson basketball player. And some more financial advisors. This thing is as thick as can be. I don't have time to read it all, but you can go to Sports Illustrated and read. Sewell is somebody here, Dawkins Sewell. I mean, this anyway is being paid annually. Only Ohio State, Texas, and UCLA have more lucrative apparel deals. Now, this is a thing. Louisville had $160 million extension to the Adidas program there, and evidently Ohio State, Texas, and UCLA have more lucrative schemes going with Adidas. So, but they didn't say anybody bribed anyone. It's just these college basketball teams have come into major situations. And nonetheless, this is in Major League Baseball. We'll get to a much happier thing. The Astros were in Dallas at 12-2. Astros over the Rangers, and the Marlins were in Denver. The Rockies won that one 15-9. The Mariners were in Oakland 6-5. The Giants were in Arizona. D-backs pulled that one out 4-3. D-backs had 7 hits, 1 error, and the Giants 6 hits and no errors. The Cubs were in St. Louis. Mr. Lackey was the winner there, 5-1. Of course, they now have the Central title for what it's worth in the National League ball. The Rays were in New York. Yankees 6-1. The Nationals were in Philly, and they lost to Philly 7-5. Nationals will be heading to Wrigley Field next week, and the Orioles were in Pittsburgh 5-3. The Blue Jays were in Fenway Park. Red Sox 10-7. Red Sox had 13 hits, 1 error, and the Blue Jays 10 hits and 1 error there. The Twins were in Cleveland. Cleveland 4-2. If the Twins win the wild card in New York, they could face Cleveland once again. Atlanta was in New York, Mets 7-1 over Atlanta, and in 10, the Angels were on the south side of Chicago. White Sox 6-4. The Reds were in Milwaukee and shut out the Brewers 6-0. And the Tigers were in Kansas City 7-4. And the Padres were to Dodgers and were shut out by the Dodgers 10-0. Game we tuned into, Mr. Hill was the winner in that contest. Now, to the standings as they stand here. The Red Sox are in the playoffs. The Yankees are in the playoffs. They're 3 back of the Red Sox in the American League East. In the Central, Cleveland has got the division. The Twins are in the playoffs. And about it. In the West, it's all Houston of the American League. In the National League, it's the Nationals. They won that division. And in the Central, the Cubs have won the Central, and that would be in the East for the Nationals. And the Brewers are 6 back. The Cards are 7 back. They're just back. And in the West, the Dodgers have won the National League West. The Arizona D-backs. Let's have to see what Y is here. Y. And they clinched the wild card. So we've got these wild cards going, and we can. When will this be on the playoff schedule? Maybe we'll get it. Uh-oh. Okay, the Twins would be at New York. That will be on Tuesday. And the National League wild card will be on Wednesday, October the 4th. And the D-backs are there. So those are the two. Let me just... I don't think we'll find anything out. Those are 2 wild cards. So then we'll go... Yeah, basically the same thing here. Minnesota will be at New York, and the Rockies will be at Arizona. Those will be the National League. The Cubs will be versus Washington. Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. This is if the season ended today. Anyway, we won't go into where everybody is. The Cubs will end their season in Cincinnati. The Cleveland will end their series on the south side of Chicago on the 1st of October. And let's see here. Milwaukee will end in St. Louis. And of course, the Cardinals will... wait a minute here. Oh, that's the main schedule. Anyway, this is basically how they will all end up. The Sox will be... actually, the Astros will be in Fenway Park. So that's how they will end. The Dodgers will end in Denver, will end their schedule. And Arizona will end their schedule in Kansas City. This will do it for us. We'll see you on the Friday Jobber from WBRN Radio in Boston on the Boston Red Network.